In Unit 3, we learned that the kingdom gets divided. It was basically a north and south division. The northern part, which was much larger, maintained the name of Israel. The southern part, which was much smaller, took the name of Judah. Big question is, why did this happen? Well, when Solomon was king, he was a great builder, so a lot of people were conscripted to work. He had a big army, a lot of people conscripted to be soldiers. He needed money for all this fancy building work, so a lot of heavy taxes. And it made the life of the people difficult. In fact, the common man became poorer and poorer during the reign of Solomon. And so there was the seed of rebellion fermenting through the kingdom of Israel. And, in every nation in history, when kings use their power that way to build up, even though it seems like they're building up the kingdom, but it makes life absolutely miserable for their people, sooner or later there'll be a blow-up, and there was a blow-up for Israel. And this led to the permanent division of the kingdom of Israel. It now became Israel and Judah. Now, who is exactly responsible? Who was really at fault? Well, Solomon had some responsibility. His son Rehoboam had some responsibility. There were some rebellious leaders like Jeroboam. But the Bible seems to say that this was also a part of the plan of God. God saw that somehow the nation would be better off if they were divided. That way, they would not be able to create so much chaos and anarchy like they did through most of the period of Judges and also the period of Samuel. And so consequently, we have like North and South Korea. Now we have Israel and Judah. Israel would only last about 200 years, Judah for about 350 years. So much more successful, even though it was much smaller in size. And the kings that we will look at in this unit are all kings of Judah. We're not going to be looking at the kings of Israel. They were all considered to be godless. They walked away from God and went their own separate ways. So the Bible doesn't have much good to say about them. And so welcome to this unit of the divided monarchy. And we will learn about some of the interesting kings of Judah. The last king to rule a united kingdom for a very short time was the son of Solomon. His name was Rehoboam. He was 40 years old when he became a king, so he was not exactly a young man. But the rebellion was fermenting already. It was ready to burst open. And so the leaders of all the tribes came to Rehoboam and they said, if you will change the taxes, the conscriptions, the workloads that your father put on us, then we will follow you. If not, we're going to break up. He says, okay, let me talk to some people. He talked to the older counselors and they said, yes, the people are right. Your father was too harsh, was too hard. Listen to the people. Then he talked to the wrong group of people who were also his counselors, but also his friends, people his age. Peer pressure is an amazing thing, but it's usually has negative results. And so those young men says, hey, you must show that you are the king. Prove to them that you will be stronger than Solomon. And so he gave them the answer. If you think Solomon was hard on you, wait till you see what I will do to you. Then you will know what strength really is. He chose the wrong reasons. He chose the wrong friends. He chose the wrong counselors. And because of that, the kingdom got split. Be careful of peer pressure. Be careful of what your best friends tell you. Oh, you should do this. Why don't you try this? This is okay. Very often, people who are older, who have been longer in life can give you better advice than your own classmates or your own clique of friends who haven't lived long enough. If Rehoboam had listened to the older counselors who had worked for Solomon, everything would have been fine. But he listened to his friends, and everything went wrong. The whole kingdom got split. Now, Rehoboam himself did not completely abandon God. His instinct was to fight and reconquer all the tribes and unite the kingdom again, and God sent word through a prophet saying, no, stop. Don't change this plan. And so he stopped. He listened to God. So he was not a completely bad man. He simply listened to bad advice from the wrong group of friends. And I think all of us need to be careful of following into the trap that Rehoboam found himself in. Since we don't have time to look at all of the kings of Judah, there are 20 of them, we are only going to pick and choose certain samples. Then the next king, he is quite important in terms of political, economic achievement, was a man called Asa. What was most important about Asa, though, was his relationship with God. He's described as a man who was upright, who was godly, who lived close to God, who listened to the voice of God, who listened to the instructions and the counsel of God. And because of this special relationship he had with God, he launched a very serious program in the kingdom that we call Reformation. He wanted his people to experience that strong relationship with God. He didn't want to do it alone. It was not enough for him to be good. He wanted the nation to be good. And so, like any great leader of history, he attempted to change the lifestyle, the attitudes, the worldview, the way of doing things of every citizen in Judah. Now, he had some success, not completely, because, people don't always change just because a leader is good. But he does demonstrate that his greatness, his success at the political level, at the economic and the military level, came largely because of that faithfulness to God. From Asa, we can learn the significance of goodness, not just any kind of goodness, but goodness that arises from relationship with God. When that goodness is exposed in our lives, it will impact other people. And so a lot of people in Judah, well, their relationship with God improved because of this king. And so for the time that he was a king, the nation was very close to God. Sadly, of course, that situation did not always persist, but at least Asa did his best. He stayed close to God, he walked closely with God, he listened to all the instructions of God, and he kept his nation reformed and also in a close relationship with God. Sometimes that's the best thing we can do, to help the people around us to be close to God, to follow us, to model that relationship. One of my favorite kings of Judah was a man called Jehoshaphat. He was also a good man, a righteous man. He was a godly man. The main story about him was what happened when some enemies came. About 3 nations. They completely surrounded his little country of Judah. And Jehoshaphat knew that he just did not have enough soldiers. His army was not large enough. The enemy was too great. He could not defeat them. But because of his special relationship with God, Judah did exactly what we would have expected him to do. Instead of calling the generals together and say, let's plan a battle, he went to the temple to pray. His view was, God knows best. And so I must ask God what to do. And God listened. God answered his prayer. He sent a young prophet to him who had a special message. Jehoshaphat, don't worry. You will not even have to fight this battle. God is going to fight this battle for you. The enemies will be defeated. You will not even have to lift any sword. Wow, can you imagine that? Now he gets this grand assurance that God will be with him, and he demonstrated his complete trust in the words of God by calling the people together for worship, and instead of planning battle strategy, he had a long worship service. And he told the people, if you trust God and trust his prophets, everything will be all right. But he didn't stop there. God had told him, go to the battlefield. Go to see what I will do for you. And you know what Jehoshaphat did? He marched his choir in front of his army. Think about it. The choir was going in front of the soldiers because he completely trusted that God would keep his word. God says the battle is not yours. The battle is mine. I will defeat the enemy. So Jehoshaphat takes his army, puts his choir in the front. They sing their way, and when they get to the battlefield, all the enemies were dead. God had sowed confusion among the enemies, and they started fighting one another, and they killed each other. When Jehoshaphat got there, no one to fight. The words of God literally were that you would not have to fight this battle. I love this story because it tells us of the power of a song of faith and how it can help us in life. It helped Jehoshaphat to win a big battle. It can help your life as well. So if you're feeling a bit down, find a good song of faith. Sing that song, and God will go before you to win your battles. Our next king is sort of a mixed bag of attitudes and lifestyle, and even in his relationship with God. He was rescued by the wife of the high priest from an attempted assassination of all the royal family. He was 8 years old when he was proclaimed to be the king. So, he was relatively young. He had this grand, miraculous escape. And the high priest brought him up like his own son and protected him until he was old enough to be put on the throne. And then the Bible tells us in Chronicles a very sad thing about Joash. It says that he was God-fearing, that he followed everything God said, he did everything that was right as long as that high priest was alive. The name of the high priest was Jehoiada. He was the one who anointed him as king of Judah. So here was a young man who began his career of king at a very young age, who was given special blessings by God, a miraculous escape, a wonderful priestly family to bring him up. But his goodness only lasted for as long as Jehoiada lasted. There are some people who are like that. They're good only as long as that particular person is in their lives. And the moment Jehoiada died, Joash turned. He turned bad, he turned sour, he turned rotten. And when Jehoiada's son came with words from God, reprimanding him for becoming a bad king now, guess what Joash did? He had the son of the high priest executed, killed. He didn't even remember the love and the protection that the father had provided him while he was alive. His goodness only lasted for a short time during the life of Jehoiada. In the end, he had a tragic ending. He was assassinated by some of his officers. And the people hated him so much by the time he died, they didn't even want to bury him in the royal tombs. We have to be consistent in our relationship, especially with God. We cannot be good because someone around us is good, and then turn bad because, it doesn't fit our lives anymore. I hope that you will learn the right lessons from Joash. Be consistent in your relationship with God, and the blessings will always be there. In the stories of the kings of Judah, we get this picture that even the very best can make a mistake, a really serious mistake. One of those was Uzziah. He was a king for 52 years. That's a very, very long time, more than half a century. He raised this little kingdom of Judah to the level it had reached during the time of Solomon. So he was an amazing king. He was, in all accounts, a good king. He protected the country. The economy grew tremendously. He had trade with countries all around the world. He built great cities and fortresses. He had a large army, won many battles. But I guess even the very best people, his relationship with God is considered to be generally a good one. Such people can suffer from a small problem which becomes a really huge one. And this is a problem that Christians have considered for 2,000 years as the number one sin, and that is pride. Uzziah reached a point where he thought, I'm the king of Judah. I'm the great king of Judah. No king of Judah has been as great as me. In fact, he was right in that. So why can't I do something more? He decided that he will perform a sacrifice. So he went into the temple and tried to perform a sacrifice, a job that was allowed only for the priests. He tried to do something that God says you cannot do. You may be the king, but you are not a priest. He's not a Samuel or a Moses. And so he was struck with leprosy. And for the rest of his life, he had to hide behind a curtain and be the king, and his son basically ruled the kingdom in his presence or in the front. So the people saw his son. They didn't see Uzziah for most of his later life. One mistake, brought about by pride, almost caused his downfall. Now his kingdom remained strong. God blessed the rest of the work that he did, but he still had to live with the consequences of his pride, and that was the leprosy. And he would die a leper. He would die hidden behind the veil because of that little bit of pride that popped up in his life. This is why Christianity has always considered pride the number one sin. Pride makes us do many things that we know are wrong, simply because we think, I can do it. I'm good enough. I'm great enough. That is pride at work. Another great king of Judah was a man called Hezekiah. And for most of his life, he had a perfect relationship with God. He did all the right things. He created this huge revival of the nation to bring them closer to God. He celebrated a giant Passover at the temple. He fixed up anything that was wrong in the country. He did all the right things. But he had a different flaw from Uzziah. Uzziah had pride. Hezekiah had a different problem. He could not accept the inevitable. One day God sent the prophet Isaiah, Hezekiah, your time is up. He was sick. You're going to die. So prepare your kingdom and your successor. And Hezekiah threw a tantrum. Oh God, how can you do this to me? I have been faithful to you. Surely you cannot take away my life now. What have I done wrong? I want to live some more. And so God finally said, okay, Hezekiah, if you're going to cry so much, I will extend your life. And you know what Hezekiah did? He says, well, if you are going to extend my life, I want to be sure it's going to happen. So give me a sign. And he asked God for a very difficult sign. God says, okay, I will move the sun. He says, well, if you move the sun forward, anybody can do that. Seriously? Something was wrong with Hezekiah. But if you move the sun backwards, then we'll know it's really you. And God says, fine, I will do that. And I will move the sun 10 degrees backwards and extend your life by 15 years. Everything should be fine. Great, says Hezekiah. Now I'm not going to die so soon. And sure enough, the sun moved 10 degrees backwards. You know what that means in terms of physics? That the world stopped in its rotation, reversed its rotation, and then moved forward again. According to astrophysicists, that should have blown up the universe. The Babylonians were watching this because they were great star watchers, stargazers. And they realized it's happening in Jerusalem. So they sent messengers to Jerusalem. And Hezekiah was so excited to see these messengers. Instead of telling about God and this great miracle, this awesome miracle, he shows off his wealth. He makes the wrong turn. And God had to send a very sad message because You did not reveal and explain about me, about your God to these strangers. This kingdom of Babylon one day will come. About 250 years later, they would come and they would take away everything that you have shown them. You see, sometimes it's better to accept God's plan A, because plan B may not always work well. Our last king in this unit is Josiah. Wonderful man. Perfect relationship with God. He did all the right things to reform the nation, to revive the nation. Great Passover celebration. He lived quite a long time after Hezekiah. He repaired the temple. He was a teacher king. He sent teachers through all the land to teach people about the laws of God, but he himself would also go and teach the people. He did everything right. But the kingdom itself had descended into a very, very poor state. And God had decided, in order to cure this kingdom of Judah of the virus, the pandemic that they were facing, I have to send them to Babylon. They have to go back to where Abraham came from. They have to restart. Think of it like reformatting your hard drive or pressing the reset button. So God says, I'm going to send them there. This is an event that would become known, and you will learn about it, as the exile or the Babylonian captivity. And God sent word to Josiah. He says, yes, you are completely acceptable to me. You are perfect and righteous, but your nation is really gone. And so they will be destroyed. They will be dispersed. They will be sent to Babylon. However, God says, because you have stood firm in relationship to me, this will not happen while you are alive. Less than 50 years after Josiah died, the people ended up in Babylon. The captivity became a reality. But the Bible tells us that Josiah was able to die in peace. But I'm sure with a lot of sadness in his heart, knowing that all the good work that he did for God was not enough to prevent the captivity. Because the people, while they did follow him, but they had gotten to such a position that God realized they needed some strong medicine. Otherwise, they would continue in their bad direction. And so in a way, we find that Josiah is the last man standing among the kings of Judah. After him, all the kings were considered evil and godless. And so he was the last man standing, the last man to stand up for God. And he did that while knowing that his people had completely failed God and will continue to fail God in the future. I hope that you will find the courage of Josiah in your own life today, tomorrow, for as long as you live.